would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Chiari for a detailed briefing on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. We listened very closely to Shiru Efron and Michael Levy. We would like to express our condolences to Michael Levy and to all of those who are held by Hamas and other terrorist groups, and we do hope that their release will come as quickly as possible. To our great regret, all of the efforts being made by the Security Council of the United Nations to have a ceasefire and release the hostages to date have been blocked by the United States, who since the 7th of October of last year used their veto 6 times just to make sure that the Israeli military operation can continue in Gaza, and therefore that the lives of hostages continue being endangered. It is our understanding that as a result, only 1/3 of the Israelis captured are now being used in the lists that are discussed by negotiators, and we do wish very much that ultimately you will be reunited with your brother. As regards the silence of the Council and our not condemnation of Hamas, we were ready to do that on the 18th of October 2023, but our American colleagues vetoed a draft resolution on that. And this is something they are not at all in favor of being reminded today. Distinguished colleagues, as is clearly can be seen from the statement made by Khaled Chiari, the Security Council Resolution 2334 is not being implemented. Israelis continues with their plans to build new settlements on the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. They use a fabricated pretext that supposedly that there are no construction permits, and this is used to systematically destroy Palestinian homes. This is a height of cynicism where the Palestinians who cannot afford to pay the high duties to the Israelis are then compelled to, with their own hands, destroy their homes. This is a mockery of human dignity. Continued illegal construction and the widening of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, undermines a negotiated resolution to one of the final status issues, namely territory and borders. This is in violation of Security Council and General Assembly decisions, including the September resolution, which came out of the 10th Emergency Special Session of the GA in support of the second advisory opinion by the ICJ on the legal consequences of the Israeli policies on the occupied Palestinian territories. Against this background, we are particularly concerned by the statement made by the Israeli officials about forcibly change the demographics of Gaza so as to recolonize the Strip. We are full of indignation as regards the passage by the Knesset of a law on deporting the families of terrorists, which gives Israel the right to send to Gaza those Palestinians who did not tell them about the criminal intent of their relatives. This way, according to the Palestinians, suspect Palestinians can end up in Gaza, where his fate will be either die from starvation or being bombed. And these are the laws that are being adopted by the country, which claims that it is the only democracy in the Middle East. We think such steps are unacceptable, as are unacceptable the public appeals by some members of the Netanyahu government to annex the West Bank. We categorically reject the policy of creating facts on the ground. The Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory is illegal in any event from the viewpoint of international law, and there is no justification for it. We call on West Jerusalem to immediately start implementing Resolution 2334 and to stop all settlement activity. Madam President, today many have been talking about the continued violence in the OPT and used horrifying statistics. Since the beginning of the escalation in Gaza, there are already 44,000 Palestinians who were killed, and these are the ones we know about. Most of them are women and children. And against this background of these horrifying factors, the West Bank statistics somewhat overshadows. But there, since October 2023 to October 2024, 736 Palestinians died, and this is when officially there is no military operation there. The life of the Palestinians on the West Bank is essentially unbearable. The Secretary General report is an illustration of the senseless and relentless violence on the part of Israeli settlers. On the 5th of October, 40 Israelis with rifles, clubs, crowbars, and pepper sprays started hunting for olive pickers. They beat up 25 Palestinians, broke their limbs, and cracked their skulls. There was a child who was a victim of this, a person with disability, a woman, an elderly person. After that, the entire harvest settlers. And then the Israeli policemen arrived. What did they do? They, after all, are there to maintain the law and order in the lawful state, according to the Israeli authorities. They dispersed the Palestinians using stun grenades. Such an attitude towards Palestinians as second-rate people is unacceptable, and the international community has to insist on ending this monstrous policy by Western Jerusalem. The West Bank situation cannot be considered outside of the broader context of Gaza escalation. It's been more than a year that's been going on. Security Council members tabled many times a resolution demanding unconditional ceasefire in Gaza as a first step to stabilize the situation at the OPT. Unfortunately, the United States, as we already said, have been consistently vetoing these documents, stating that no one should impose a peaceful solution on Israel. We are not arguing the fact that Israel is a sovereign state. Do not question their right to ensure their defense. But we are concerned that the Israeli side use this right to justify not only fighting terrorism on their own territory, but also to impose a collective punishment of the Palestinian people in Gaza, West Bank, bombarding Lebanon, occupy Syrian lands. We get the impression that fully ensuring one's defense is seen by Israel as establishing a barren wasteland around them, targeted by Israeli tanks, drones, and fighter planes. And negotiating with Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians, West Jerusalem is planning to only do from the position of force and intimidation, expecting that Washington will also cover them and provide them with diplomatic and military support. But this is not a way to resolve a conflict. This is how to deepen them. If you push people to a situation where they have nothing to lose, well, don't be surprised when radical ideas become popular. Or don't be surprised when essentially there is a freeze of the process of normalizing relations between regional actors and Israel against the backdrop of Gaza. Instead of looking for solutions of problems, West Jerusalem is creating new ones, coming into effect early next year of the Knesset bills banning UNRWA will mean the end of functioning and the dismantling of a key UN agency to help Palestinians, to which there's no alternative. This is a direct violation of the Charter, General Assembly resolutions which determine the mandate of the agency, and international law. This is also a prologue to removing refugees issues as one of final status issues together with borders, water, and Jerusalem. The Israeli action in Gaza do not make us hopeful that Israel, as the occupying power, will take upon itself all of the UNRWA functions. Madam President, we believe there is an alternative to what is happening in the OPT, and the alternative is in the will of the international community, which is illustrated in the overwhelming majority who voted for the resolution at the 10th Emergency Special Session of the Assembly in support of UNRWA mandate and with a demand for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Russian position of principle on Middle East settlement concurs with the will of the international community. We call for an unconditional ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian access, release of all hostages and those who are forcibly detained, and relaunching peace process on a generally recognized international legal basis. This is the only way not only to get to lasting peace between the Palestinians and Israelis, but also to remove the source of destabilization for the entire region. I thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General Chiari, for your briefing. I also wish to thank Dr. Efron for your briefing and also for your recommendations. And Michael Levy, I want to especially thank you for sharing your anguish, your frustration with this council. We will continue our efforts to do everything possible to bring your brother Or home to his loving family. Colleagues, the United States is committed to finalizing a ceasefire in Gaza with the release of hostages that allows for a surge in humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians. That is our North Star. And despite progress coming in fits and starts, Despite progress feeling at times frustratingly slow, there is still a reason for hope. Thanks to the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, Hamas is isolated. As we sit here, negotiators are in the region, working hard to close the remaining gaps between the parties. Now, let me be clear, I'm not starry-eyed here, but there are still difficult issues to resolve. We cannot give up on diplomacy. We cannot give up on the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza for over a year have lived through hell, a hell that was ignited by Hamas when it attacked Israel on October 7th. This was not an effort at peace. This was a declaration of war. And as we heard from Michael, we cannot give up on the 100+ remaining hostages, including 7 Americans, or their families, who have also endured the unimaginable these past 14 months. Colleagues, granting Hamas, a terrorist organization, their demand for an immediate unconditional ceasefire offers no path to durable peace. It will not end the suffering or cycles of violence for Israelis and Palestinians. Instead, we must speak with one voice and demand that Hamas agree to release the hostages they are holding so that we can implement the deal on the table, to end the suffering of hostages from more than a dozen member states and millions of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and to put the parties back on a path toward a 2-state solution. It also is time for Israel and the United Nations to stop working against each other and instead take pragmatic steps to ensure there is no interruption of humanitarian aid delivery to Palestinians in desperate need. We reiterate our concern that Israel must not in any way restrict the delivery of humanitarian assistance in Gaza, imposing obstacles that must be removed. Going forward, Israel must also ensure that the implementation of recent legislation does not further impede the delivery of humanitarian assistance and critical services, including by UNRWA, which remains a vital lifeline for Palestinians. Equally vital, as the aid delivery architecture in Gaza evolves, the UN must work with all relevant parties and have a viable plan in place to facilitate aid deliveries. The Secretary General's recent letter regarding UNRWA and the future of aid delivery in Gaza suggests that the UN has not yet begun an earnest conversation with Israel regarding implementation of the legislation. Nor does it appear that relevant UN agencies have had detailed conversations regarding steps they could take to help ensure continuity of UN aid deliveries to Gaza. With lives in the balance, this must change. The UN must demonstrate that it will continue to work to find a path to support the people of Gaza. Colleagues, cynicism will not end this horrific conflict, but bold leadership can offer the prospects of a durable peace, one in which Palestinians and Israelis live side by side with equal levels of dignity, security, and opportunity. To put a finer point on it, a durable peace between Israelis and Palestinians will only be achieved through a negotiated 2-state solution consistent with this Council's resolutions. There's no other path that guarantees Palestinians can live with the freedom and dignity they deserve. And there's no other path that guarantees an enduring peace between Israel and its neighbors. This is a peace worth striving for, and it's one the United States has worked tirelessly to advance, even in the darkest hours since October 7th. And so even as we work to surge relief into Gaza right now, we must also think about a day after, one in which Gaza is reunited with the West Bank under the control and governance of a revitalized and reformed Palestinian Authority. Economic security in the West Bank offers a foundation on which the parties can build. In this regard, we welcome the Israeli government's recent decision to extend correspondent bank relationships between Israeli banks and their Palestinian counterparts for another year. It's a step in the right direction to help build trust and deepen economic links, but it's just a start. We need to see a resumption of the economic activities, including worker permits that ground to a halt following October 7th. We also remain deeply concerned that other Israeli actions in the West Bank undercut the Palestinian Authority's ability to meet the needs of the Palestinian people and more broadly dampen the prospects of a two-state solution. Colleagues, we reiterate our position that advancing Israeli settlements in the West Bank is an obstacle to the achievement of a two-state solution, the end state we all want to see as we seek to bring the fighting in Gaza to a close. Yet, more settlement units were approved this past year than in any other 12-month period this decade. We reiterate our belief that Israel's program of support for the expansion of settlements is inconsistent with international law and only serves to weaken Israeli security. We also remain deeply concerned about violence committed by extremist settlers in the West Bank. A disproportionate amount of this violence emanates from illegal outposts, several dozen of which have been established over the past year. To be clear, these outposts are illegal under Israeli law. The hundreds of violent attacks over the past year have forced Palestinians to abandon their homes and vacate more than a dozen of their villages. Even more alarming, last year saw the highest number of Palestinians killed in the West Bank since the UN began collecting data in 2005. We condemn the attacks by extremist settlers in the strongest possible terms and reiterate that Israel must intervene and stop them, or better yet, prevent them in the first place. To that end, we urge Israel to halt efforts to legalize outposts in the West Bank and to do everything possible to de-escalate tensions and hold all perpetrators of violence accountable, no matter the background of the perpetrator or the victim. Colleagues, I first addressed this council on this topic in March of 2021 during my first presidency. I had just arrived at the United States mission to the United Nations just a few weeks prior. And I outlined 3 pillars of U.S. policy with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first was to sustain our ironclad commitment to Israel's security. The second was to help both Israelis and Palestinians take steps toward a two-state solution, ensuring Israel's future as a democratic and Jewish state while upholding the Palestinian people's legitimate aspirations for a state of their own. And the third was to deliver aid to the Palestinian people. I said then, and I quote, "Let us strive to achieve peace and prosperity for all." So much has changed since that meeting nearly 4 years ago. So many lives have been shattered before, on, and in the months that have followed October 7th as a result of the catastrophic conflict that Hamas instigated. But now, like in 2021, the United States remains committed to bringing that cycle to an end. And so we will continue to work tirelessly to advance diplomacy on the ground. For a ceasefire with the release of hostages, for a surge of aid today and days after in Gaza that reaffirms the dignity, the security, and opportunity of Palestinians and Israelis alike. For a two-state solution and a new day for the next generation. Let us strive to achieve that peace and prosperity for all. Thank you.